My name is Kelly, and I have an unhealthy obsession with serial killers.
Ian Brady, Myra Hindley. This is King Size Killers and Bite Size Bits, done from the comfort of our own homes via conference with my brother. Due to the whole, 2020 social distancing, we thought this would be the best way to do it. So we're going to talk about the Moors murders and John Wayne Gacy. The Moors murders took place in England between 1963 and 1965, and it was Ian Brady and Myra Headley, and these two were like a special kind of twisted. They murdered children, and all but one, who is Keith Bennett, has been found, and they're both dead now. And Ian Brady refused to give up where the little man's body was buried. So basically what they would do is they would troll around. I think a few times they were separate, and Ian would be on like a motorcycle and would flash his lights at Myra when he saw somebody that he wanted her to, coax into the car. And their first victim was somebody she actually knew. And they would take him out to the moors, and Ian would rape them and kill them. And then they would bury their body in the moor. And Ian liked to take a lot of photos. And so he would take pictures of Myra on these little kids' graves. And sometimes they were shot with a dog. Like, they would have picnics out there. And all the while, while these little kids were underneath them, dead. And so he had, I think he had 3 boys and 2 girls that they murdered. And like I said, each time Myra would ask them to like maybe help them find a glove. And they said due to the fact that she was a female, the kids were a little more trusting. And back in the 60s, I mean, I don't think we had yet become, stranger danger and all that. So one of the little kids that they start again. So one of the young girls that they kidnapped, they actually took back to their flat, and they recorded them torturing her. And when they were both captured, she claimed innocence. But when they played this tape, I mean, it was absolutely terrible. This little girl is like calling her mom and, telling her that, she'll be good, don't hurt her. And you can hear Myra, yelling at the girl to be quiet. And he put a ball gag in her mouth. I mean, this was a young girl. So they killed her, and they took her out and they buried her in the moors. And it took a little while for them to connect the murders because there were no bodies there. They weren't finding any bodies. These kids were just going missing. So they got the bright idea. Ian had the bright idea of inviting Myra's brother-in-law over because he was like a bad boy in the neighborhood. And Ian thought maybe they could add him to their crime spree. So they invited him over, and there was another young man that was there that they had picked up. And so Ian took an axe to this kid and axed him to death. And so Myra's brother-in-law, helps them clean everything up and wrap up the body. And then he was like, peace out. And he went home and he told his wife what had happened. And so they grabbed a knife and walked down to a phone booth and called the police and told the police. And so that's how they were apprehended. And when the police arrived at their apartment, they had locked this young man's body in the upstairs bedroom. And when the police asked for the key, they kept saying that, they didn't have it, that there really wasn't anything in that room. And so the detective basically said, we will kick open the door. So you're either going to give us the key or we're going to kick open the door. And Ian finally told her to give him the key, and they found his body in there. So obviously they were arrested. And, for the longest time, um, Myra tried to, play herself off as, I didn't know what he was going to do with him. I didn't know that there was a body buried beneath me, and um, but she could not dispute her voice on the videotape. So she spent 30 years in prison. She died in prison, but she petitioned for parole, and she actually had a group of followers because now she had a changed woman and blah blah blah. Same bullshit story every prisoner gives you after so long. And so she never was released. She died in prison, which she should have. But she started to admit later on, because she thought if she started to admit her role in these crimes, that she had a better chance at parole. And that didn't happen. So that was a good thing. Um, and Ian, he never gave up the location of um, Keith Bennett's body, and so his mother has spent all this time not knowing where her son is. And her mother, or his mother, actually takes flowers over, and there's like a little marker on the moors for him. um and in researching their background, I get two stories. There was one story of Myra's upbringing as idyllic, everything was fine, she came from a middle class family. And then there's a completely other different story about how her dad was a brute and a drunk, and you know was cruel. So you I don't know how that happened, how you have like two completely different ideas of somebody's upbringing, but whatever. But they were she stayed faithful to him for quite some time while they were in prison, um until she realized that if she started confessing, she'd get a better chance for parole. But like I said, that didn't happen. So both those jackholes died in prison, and that's exactly where they needed to be. John Wayne Gacy. He was accused of murdering over 30 young men, most of which were found in the crawl space of his home. Um, and he's kind of like, he reminds me of Bundy because he had some narcissistic tendencies, and he did not want to admit that he was a homosexual. Like, he considered himself bi, which it could be true, but everyone he murdered was a male. And he would pick up these young men and entice them back to his house, where he would do this handcuff trick. And he was once quoted as, when one victim asked him what the trick was after he had put the handcuffs on the kid, he reached into his pocket and he pulled out the key, and he said, the trick is you have to have the key. So these young men knew what was going to happen to him at some point. Sometimes he would drug them. He When he started out, he didn't. I think there was one that he didn't kill. He just picked up and he put chloroform over his mouth and took him home and tortured him, but then let him go, dropped him off on a porch somewhere. But the first murder he committed was with a man he brought home, and he was married to his first wife at the time. And he says that he woke up to this man in the kitchen with a knife. Reports say that this poor guy was making him breakfast. But anyway, Gacy stabbed him to death in his kitchen, in his wife's kitchen. And he had to dispose of everything and clean this up. And he said that the report was that he just finished up cleaning everything and his wife walked in. Now, I don't know if I could live with that anxiety. Like, holy shit. You think about doing something so awful and so wrong and trying so hard not to get caught, and here your wife is coming home and you know this. I don't know, that's a lot of pressure. Convicted of like sodomy on a 15-year-old boy that only did 18 months, I think, because he was such a model prisoner. And he was their cook. And he actually did interviews while in prison. It was for, I think, Christmas. And he was the head cook. And he was very proud of this. So he actually was taking this news crew around, showing them the food that he had prepared. And I think that one of the recipes was his recipe. I mean, he was just very, nonchalant about it and felt pretty good, I think, at the time. So anyway, they let him out on good behavior. Of course, his wife and his kids, they left. Like, that was it, kaput. And he ended up marrying again. And her family owned a chain of Kentucky Fried Chicken franchises. And he went to work as a manager at one of the restaurants. From all accounts, he was a hard worker. He was a huge people person. He would throw themed parties at his house. He actually had his photo taken with the first lady at the time, Rosalind Carter. I'm sure she looked back on that fondly. But, it was just kind of, you kind of compare him a little bit. Like, nobody suspected him of raping and murdering these men. So when he was actually one of the young men, the last young man that he abducted, his parents threw such a fit that really got the ball rolling, and the last person he was seen with was Gacy. So they put surveillance on him, and he kind of ate this up. He'd buy him a beer, or he'd send food out to him, and he once invited them in his home. And one of the detectives had to use the restroom, and it was wintertime, and he noticed when the heat kicked on, this awful smell started coming up through the vents. And, he's like, he kind of didn't really think too much of it at the time. Who's going to sit in someone's bathroom and think there's like 30 dead bodies in the basement? So they left, blah, blah, blah. But it started to get to him, their surveillance. And he actually went to one of like the regular drugstores that he went to and sold some pot, and they arrested him for that. And so then, if I'm remembering correctly, they ended up executing a search warrant on his house, and one of the memories kind of popped with that detective, and he was like, okay, there was something funky coming up through the vents. And so they started ripping up the floorboards, and in this crawl space, it was just full. There was 30 human beings buried in these like shallow graves down there. And Gacy actually confessed to everything, even told them he dumped a couple off of a bridge. And so before he went to trial, he decided to plead not guilty. And he started to say that, who knows how those bodies got down there? When I bought the house, there was always a funny smell in it. And, we had a dog, and she would piddle. And, sometimes, you're trying to train a puppy. So he's trying to like explain all of these things. Like, how can you live in a house and have that smell and not think that you need to have something checked? Because come on. And I live in the country, and if a mouse dies in my basement, the whole house fucking knows it. So I don't know how he did it. So anyway, he went and he pleaded not guilty, and he did it at a prison interview and tried to explain everything away, and how he didn't believe in violence, and he didn't do the things that his dad did. And, you can separate those two. You don't have to beat your kids, but you're still going out and you're doing these things to young people. You know what I mean? It's just, you can't have the best of both worlds. You can't think one way and act another. It just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, he was sentenced to death. And I think it was like a month before, his execution, he was still trying to get out of it. And he just contradicted himself. If you listen to his prison interviews, it's laughable, because he just makes absolutely no sense. His explanations for, all of the evidence that they found, just he had no idea how it got there. Maybe the previous owners left it. I don't know. But, again, he was somebody that could dress up like a clown and go entertain kids at a birthday party. These people have a way of just, it's terrifying how they fit in. Not everybody who's what we would consider crazy, because this is crazy shit. They're not actually crazy. They're actually quite calculated. And he hated being put in the same categories, Bundy and Dahmer and Manson. He hated that. He got really angry when people would put him in that category, and he's actually no different. Absolutely no different. If you think of serial killers in the United States of America, the first two that pop into my mind are Bundy and Gacy. First two. And so these his brain was actually, the psychiatrist that treated him, she actually kept his brain to study it. And I think that they should do that. I've always thought that there's got to be, a way to detect it sooner. I don't know. It's all consuming. It's crazy. And these people live right next door to you. So that was the nice little tidbit of John Wayne Gacy.